Before I start, I just want to share a few things because it's been talked about this being a decades-long problem. It has been. There's no doubt there's been a problem. But in the entire previous administration's 4 years, 2.4 million encounters. In just 2 years, we've had 4.7 million encounters, 1.2 million gotaways. I can do that math, 5.9 million people. 25 states in the United States have populations less than 4.6 million. Let that number sink in. And the removal of the policies on day one, the executive orders that were written and reversing policies implemented that solved many of this, or really began to solve this problem, were done away with. And a surge of people came to our border. And the drug cartels have taken advantage of the situation by the neutralizing effects that I talked about in my opening statement. It was also mentioned earlier about the humanitarian problems from previous administrations. I remember sitting in this committee right over there when I was a freshman, and there was this big to-do about 2 migrant deaths. We weren't in charge at that time, but it was a big hullabaloo because there were 2 migrant deaths. Any death, we should make a big deal out of it. In the past 2 years, under this administration's policies, under Mayorkas's reckless behavior, reckless, border policies, 1,400 migrants have died. Here's one just floating in the river. 1,400. We talk about it was a humanitarian crisis in the previous administration. Nothing now. 1,400. Over 1,400. Yes, this is Mayorkas's failure. Mr. Lamb, or Sheriff Lamb, I'd like to start with you today. Mr. Beer was mentioning some statistics about who's carrying the drugs into the country. Those carpet shoes you showed earlier, do you think those are counted in his statistics? The video that I showed earlier of all this just parade of people carrying drugs into our country, are they counted in his statistics?
Mr. Chairman, no, sir. And I find it comical that a lot of researchers and politicians like to tell us what's going on the border, but they don't ever come down to the border to actually see it in person. We're telling you statistics that we see every day. Here's the remnants of it. This tells you everything you need to know, and I've got thousands of these in hundreds of spots throughout my county.
Yeah, those aren't in the statistics, and they're certainly not coming through the ports of entry, are they, Sheriff Lamb?
No, they are not coming through the ports of entry.
Okay. Thank you. Rebecca, I really appreciate you being here, and I know the difficulty of you being here. One of our fellow witnesses today, Sheriff Lamb, mentioned and talked about the flow of fentanyl. He's 55 miles from the border. You're in Michigan, I think, right? Quite a ways from the border. Do you mind elaborating a little bit on how it's impacted your community? And I mean, you shared your story, but you're with other parents who've lost their children. Can you share the story of how it's impacting your community?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, in the support groups, there have been some parents who have committed suicide, siblings who have. It's devastating families. It's been very difficult for my daughters. One daughter, she went off to Michigan State and came home after semester. It was just too painful. Now she is attending in our hometown at Oakland University. One of my son's friends was waiting tables at the same restaurant where my daughter was, and I went to eat there last summer, and he came up to me and he said that he had been friends with both of my sons, but really good friends with Kyler, and I remember they had worked together for a while, and he told me that he got clean from drugs after my son's deaths, and he said he completely stopped doing marijuana, in fact, like he stopped doing any kind of drugs. He said, I want you to know that your son's death started a movement in our hometown. And he said, so that when people show up with pills, they're ostracized and they're condemned, But he said, but I think, for how long? How many of the kids in the high schools now know about my son's deaths?